Hey everybody, it's Steve from RawFuelTV. Now today we got our hands on a couple of TRA clutches. These are both off Ski-Doo sleds. This particular clutch is off a 2008 800 P-Tek, and this bad boy here is off of a 2009 600 Etec. Now these TRA clutches, total range adjustability, they're pretty much the same across the board for the newer, higher horsepower sleds. So you're going to be able to take the principles from these clutch removals and apply it to your 2014, 15, or 16 sled, and it's virtually going to be the exact same thing. So the initial complaints, it was that this particular clutch wasn't shifting that well, and the complaints from this clutch here is that it's a little bit noisy on idle. So we're going to take them apart, we're going to clean them, find out what parts need to be replaced, and go from there. So the tools for this install, pretty simple. Heavy hammer, Sharpie to mark those balance points, our clutch puller tool, our button retainers, 6mm Allen, we decided to go with a socket, and the impact, then the tool that we fashioned up. Simply a bolt with a spacer and a washer, followed by a couple other spacers, a nut, and the wrench to tighten down that nut. Now we're going to start with the 800 P-Tek clutch. We're going to do a quick external exam. So when you run your hands along the sheaves, you're going to notice that in this particular clutch, there is a little bit of wear on the sheaves, just indicating that the belt was riding in a certain area for a period of time. Enough heat generates, and you slowly over time you wear a light mark into the actual sheave itself. So we've got our fixed sheave here. We've got our movable sheave here. We've got our governor cup, which is right here. And inside this, we're going to have our spring cup. So we're going to go over all those pieces. Now, a quick external look at this clutch here. We can actually see a little bit of wear marks on the starter ring. And when we actually looked at the sled itself, we noticed that the starter the starter gear itself had a little bit of wear to it. There's probably only about half of the starter gear left, so we're going to go ahead and replace that on that machine. But what we want to look at here is any wear and tear which may be on the teeth of this ring. There's a little bit of marks to it. We're still going to be able to use this one without any big deal, but if there are any big burrs or any big chunks of metal, we're just going to lightly file them off just to make sure everything engages nice and cleanly. Now we're going to want to pull this clutch apart, but the very first thing we have to do before we pull this clutch apart is we need to note the marks on it. So these clutches themselves come from the factory and they're balanced. So when we look at this clutch, we can see right on the top here that there's a little arrow, and that arrow is going to indicate a balance mark. Right below that balance mark is another dot. You can just see it right there in the center of the camera, and that is also another balance mark. And we look to the bottom of the fixed sheave, and we can see there's a little cutout, a half moon cutout in and around that black circle. Now that half moon cutout also indicates that there's another balance mark right there. There are no other markings on this clutch. On some of the other clutches there are some light divots to them, but the marks that I've pointed out are the marks that you're going to need for balancing purposes, and that's basically for reassembly. Now obviously whoever had this clutch apart had already done the markings for us, so we actually don't end up having to do that. However, if there were no marks on this, we're going to take our black marker, we're going to put a dash, and a dash on both of these. It's just going to help us as a visual aid just to line up our clutches. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to take our clutch removal tool. We're going to insert this into the top of the clutch, and we're going to thread it down. Now we want to get enough threads into this. The reason being is that we're going to be banging onto the top of this clutch puller, and when we bang onto that, that's going to separate the movable sheave, and it's also going to separate that from the fixed sheave. But if we only have a couple threads in, we may damage the threads. So we get it in a good couple of threads. We lift the clutch itself off of the table, and we just hit lightly onto the top of the clutch. And we see when we've done that, it's actually separated the halves. So we're going to go from there. So now that we have our halves separated, remove our clutch puller. And then we're gonna be able to pull the movable sheave of the clutch apart. We've got our two halves. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our button retainer tool. We're gonna slide it down over the top of the buttons. And you're gonna see there's a groove in these buttons. If we just slide it down over top of them and through the groove, these buttons are gonna remain in place. We'll be able to effectively remove these. Now as we slowly wiggle this out, we continue to push down the button retainer clips. And now you can see that this clutch comes out and the button retainer clips are holding the buttons in. So as we spoke about, these little pieces right here, these are the buttons or slider shoes. And this clip itself is just holding it in place. That way they don't fall out. Now that we've got the governor cup out, we actually want to inspect these particular buttons because they may be a source of part of our problem. So we're going to remove the retainer tool, shove them off to the side. We're going to have a look at our buttons themselves. So this is a close-up view of the button. You can see the groove in the top, and that's what our tool hooks into. Looks like a real mini hockey puck here. We can look at some of the O-rings which are in here, and it's pretty hard to see via the camera, but these are crushed, these are dead, these are no longer good. So we're going to get rid of these. We're also going to freshen up the buttons as well. They've got a little bit of wear to them. Now when you do change these parts, you're pretty much forced to change all of them, right? So you're going to get yourself 6 new O-rings and 6 new buttons. You're not just replacing part of one side, part of another side, you're going to do the whole thing. Now when we flip the governor cup over, we're going to notice a couple of things. Right inside here we have our ramps. This little piece here is called our ramp, and on the TRA clutch it's actually adjustable, and the adjustability part is via this bolt. So what that bolt actually does is it offsets the ramp. It either slides the ramp forwards or backwards depending on what angle or what setting you have that bolt at. Now I'm just feeling these ramps here, and they certainly do have a little bit of wear on them. 2 of these ramps also have some burring on the outside of the ramp. Now that burring along the sides of this probably means that there's some other worn out parts within this clutch, so we're going to have a quick look at that. This ramp here, if you want to know what ramp you have, if you have a quick look at the side of the ramp, pretty tough to see via the camera here, but on the side of the ramp here there's going to be a number, and that number is going to tell you, so this particular ramp is a 417. That number, the very first 3 digits, is going to tell you what style of ramp that you have in your sled. And if you search that on the internet, you can find a ramp that's going to work for you for your application. Now we got the movable sheave here, and we can tell just by looking at the pins. These are adjustable weighted pins, and they do have some weights in there. So likely we've got an aftermarket clutch in here. The ramp rollers, these actually roll on the ramp themselves. There's supposed to be a little bit of play side to side, and there should be these bushings on the side. Too much play is a bad thing, but on the same note, it can't be absolutely stationary as well. So we're just checking this out. Seems to be reasonable on this half, although the rollers themselves have a little bit of a marking, which might indicate as well that there's some more issues with this particular clutch. So what I'm doing is I'm testing out the arms here, and one of these arms, 2 of these arms have sort of significant play. The third arm is a little bit tighter. I'm probably going to end up replacing those as well. This is also a good time to test the movable sheave against the fixed sheave. Now, the difference between this 08 and 09 is this is a tapered shaft, whereas the 09 clutch that we're going to get into in a minute is going to have a spline shaft. And with that spline shaft, there's going to be a slight difference in assembly. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to place the movable sheave in its place on top of the fixed sheave. And what we're looking for is, we're going to look for a little bit of flex, a little bit of play within the sheaves themselves, and there is a little bit. So what you're going to be looking for here is, there's some bushings in the top side, there's also some bushings in the bottom side here, and these may need to be replaced. If there's wear on the bottom one, that's going to cause extra torque on the top one, and it's going to wear that as well. So again, when you replace these, you typically replace them as a pair, not just as a single. Now the next thing we want to do is we're going to have to remove this spring cup. And in order to do this, we need a spring compression tool. Here at the Raw Fuel shop, we made our own compression tool, and basically it just consists of a long bolt, a nut as a spacer on the bottom with a washer, and the top side of that is going to be another couple of washers with a nut. So we're going to insert our tool into the base of the clutch. The washer is going to slide within the hole. Everything is just going to kind of sit like that. On the top side, we're going to use a large washer, followed by just another couple of spacers. Your tool may look different than this one, but this one's going to get the job done. And at this time, this only needs to be finger tight. No need to go any more than that. So we're going to take our impact gun and a 6mm Allen head. We're simply going to remove the 3 bolts which are holding the spring cup in place. Now, this spring tool, what it's actually doing is it's holding the weight of the spring in place. It's staying compressed. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to remove this nut in order to back the spring tension off. Now, the way that we've decided to set up our tool allows us to remove the spring all as one unit, and then we can deal with this separately. Remove the spring cup, the spring, and the spring seat washer. Have a quick look at the cup. Everything looks good on it. Spring retainer, there's no cracks. Looks to be in decent shape. We're going to keep that. So basically at this stage, we've pretty much disassembled the whole clutch. There are a couple of parts that we're going to need to touch up here. We're going to need to look at the ramps. We're going to need to maybe do some filing down either the side of them or replace these ramps. The buttons and the O-rings are going to need to be replaced. And the spring and everything else looks to be in pretty decent shape. Now, because we have to order a couple of parts for this clutch, I'm going to show you the reassembly process. It's pretty quick and easy. We are going to put the old parts back in simply for demonstration purposes, and then we'll deal with it later on. So we're basically just going to do this in reverse order. Our spring seat washer, we put that into the base of our spring. Spring cup goes over top of that. We insert our tool through the bottom. So now that we've got everything finger tight, we're going to remove the retainer cup. We're actually going to insert it in. Then we're going to compress down this bolt. Now we want to take this down to about the stage where the spring retainer is flush with this washer. We look for our balance mark on the spring retainer cup, and we notice the arrow. And we line that up with the mark that we previously made, or the dimple, on our movable sheath. We place it down, and it should fit snug as a bug. Now you always want to start these off by hand, just to ensure you don't cross-thread this. We're just going to lightly snug it. So we have one more check to do. We want to ensure that the tool that we have made, that everything is free within here, and that the washer for this tool is not getting hung up on the clutch. Once you remove the tool, put this aside for a second. Now again, in this particular one, we do have the old O-rings and the old buttons. I'm going to show you how to assemble it regardless. When the new ones come in, we'll strip this clutch back apart and do it again. So, we insert our buttons. We use our retainer clip. And again, we just slide that down through the center of the buttons. And we're going to do this on all three sides. Now, once you have all three sides in properly, take the movable sheave. We want to ensure that all these arms are in a down position. We again find our alignment marks. And you'll notice that the arrow lines up with the arrow, which lines up with the mark. And we lightly lay it on top. We give it a light wiggle. And you'll notice that all of the buttons will start to slide in their appropriate spots. And the retainer tools will just pop out. Last part of this install is we take our fixed sheave. Again, we look for that alignment mark. We line it all up. We slide it down on top of each other. And we're good to go. Now, this particular shaft, because it's a tapered shaft, is going to allow a little bit of variable or a little bit of variance. So therefore, we're going to be able to get these marks basically 99% lined up. With the clutch off of the 2009 600 Etec, a little bit different because it's splined. It's going to line up differently, and I'm going to show you that in a second. So basically, that's the install, removal, disassembly of this clutch. We're now going to go to the 600 Etec clutch. So exact same thing for the 600 Etec. We're going to do an external inspection. Notice the starter ring is pretty good. Everything else in the clutch is pretty good. However, one glaring mistake is shown here. So this clutch as well had been previously off, and I do see some of the alignment marks. So there's an alignment mark here by this little crescent piece which is cut out of the bottom. We got an alignment mark here. These are both in line. But our governor cup, we should see an arrow here. And we don't see that arrow. Therefore, this clutch is off. Likely that could be part of the issue for the balance. And maybe some of the noise is that this clutch just itself will not be properly balanced. So same thing for this sled. We're going to take our clutch puller, insert it, get enough of the thread into there, lift the clutch up, going to give it a shot on the top. It's going to come apart. Remove our clutch puller. And the exact same thing is going to apply. I'm going to go through this pretty quick because it's pretty much the same as the other clutch. So here's the prime difference between these. This one here is splined, and if you look at the inside of the governor cup, obviously it's splined as well. So when we found the alignment mark here, if we're trying to get this up on a complete 100% alignment, it's not going to happen. So we're going to have to do the best we can, and we're going to try it in two different areas. So if we look straight down on this clutch, alignment mark, if we draw a straight line, it's off from this alignment mark just a hair. We're going to see what it's like if we go one spline the other side. Now we've gone one spline the other side, and here's our alignment mark. This is considerably closer to here, so we're going to use this alignment point. Again, it's not a perfect science on these. These are never going to absolutely line up 100%. Now, as you can see, this was not a terribly difficult project, but it does need to be done once a year. So every fall, crack those clutches open, dust out the cobwebs. We'll see you on the trails. Until next time, take care. If you enjoy these videos, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook, or check us out at www.RawFuelTV.com.